Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law section. My name is Amanda Hamilton. Today's topic is why some retail deals get deeper scrutiny, an examination of retail merger review and analysis. Joining me today is my co-host, Anora Wang. Anora, who are our guests today?
Our guests are two former antitrust enforcers from the FTC, Emily Blackburn and Laura Onken. Emily is counsel at the law firm King Spalding. She is both a deal lawyer and a litigator whose practice focuses on antitrust and complex civil litigation. Previously, she was a senior attorney at the FTC, having worked on numerous merger investigations and enforcement actions in a broad range of industries. And just to name a few, it includes retail, supermarkets, distribution and logistics, food service, and consumer products. Particularly relevant to today's topic, in 2024, Emily played a stand-up trial role in the FTC's successful challenge to the Kroger-Albertson merger, which is in the retail space. And then Laura is a counsel at the law firm Axinn, Veltrop, Harkrider, and her practice includes transactions, litigation, and counseling. Laura started her career at the FTC, but she has spent more than a decade in private practice now. Laura has advised on mergers and acquisitions across a broad range of industries, including the retail space.
Great. Without further ado, welcome to the program, Emily and Laura. Emily, what are retail mergers and why are we discussing this topic?
So retail mergers are transactions that are combining companies that sell products directly to the consumer at a retail location. So if you think about the businesses that you see when you walk down the street or in your local shopping center, big box stores, grocery stores, discount stores, health and beauty, clothing and apparel, stores like that. And many retailers also do sell online for at least some portion of their in-store assortment, but we're talking about stores that you can kind of walk into off the street. Recent examples of retail mergers include JCPenney and Spark, which merged to form Catalyst. There was Dick's Sporting Goods acquisition of Foot Locker. Of course, Kroger's attempt to acquire Albertsons, which Anora alluded to. There's Tractor Supply, purchased Orscheln Home and Farm a few years ago. And then I think back in 2017, Bass Pro Shops acquired another outdoor retailer called Cabela. So those are some kind of recent retail mergers in the news.
Thanks, Emily. Retail mergers can be quite complex from an antitrust perspective and encompass a wide range of issues. Laura, what are some key areas of consideration when analyzing retail mergers?
I think Emily sort of hit on this, but retail mergers affect consumers directly. Consumers visit these stores, themselves. And so for the analysis, you really want to put yourself in the perspective of the consumer. And that can result in, really sort of fact-specific outcomes. Every retail merger is different and might have different considerations. A few of the big ones that sort of cut across retail mergers and may come out differently depending on the facts relate to really who is the competitive set? Both from a geographic perspective, are you looking at local markets in a city? Is it within a certain walking radius? In a more rural area, is it in a certain driving radius? But a really fact-specific analysis of what is the regional, competitive set for a consumer. And then in addition to geography, you also have the type of store that falls in that competitive set. Should e-commerce be included or not? That's often a consideration and could come out differently depending on the type of good, the type of retail. Is it the type of product where a consumer would be happy to purchase the same thing online? Or is it a type of product where a consumer really needs an in-store experience? Within brick and mortar, you also have differentiated formats. And so there's often a question of, what is the competitive set? Which stores should be included in the relevant market analysis and which aren't close enough competitors to be included. Again, these can all come out differently depending on the facts of the particular merger being considered, but those general considerations seem to cut across, most retail mergers that the FTC has looked at. If there is an issue in a merger, another common consideration is what is a sufficient divestiture?
So, Laura, I definitely agree that the areas you outlined have consistently been key areas of consideration throughout different administrations, and including today. The Biden administration, we saw add labor as a key area of consideration, and they pursued a labor theory when they challenged Kroger's acquisition of Albertsons, and maybe not a key area of consideration, but maybe something to consider going forward is the failing or flailing firm defense, given that DOJ reportedly accepted the defense in the case concerning American Express GBTs in July 2025. And for listeners who are interested in learning more about the failing firm defense, please check out our episode 289, where we discuss this topic with Chris Wilson. But let's dive into retail analysis. So, Emily, let's tackle geographic market first. What's important with geographic market analysis in regards to retail mergers?
Yeah, so as Laura alluded to, it's important to remember that antitrust looks at competition from the perspective of the consumer's demand. What are good substitutes for the consumer? And so if you're thinking about brick and mortar retail, the sort of paradigmatic example of a retail merger, the competition the store faces is determined by how far people are willing and able to travel to shop and what other reasonable alternatives are equally conveniently located. So that often means that retail mergers are characterized by dozens or even hundreds of local geographic markets. And I think, as Laura also alluded to, these are not one size fits all, right? A store in a rural area might draw customers from far and wide, whereas in a city where folks walk or use public transit, the geographic area of competition around a store might be really narrow, only a few blocks or a mile or so. And that really matters because it defines the area of effective competition. So in a large geographic market, the merging parties' shares might be relatively small because there's just a lot of other stores within that, ring or whatever shape you want to draw around the store. But if the geo market is narrow, it may be the case that there's only a few good alternatives that customers could turn to. And, as anyone who lives in a big city knows, a place might not be too far as the crow flies, but, a grocery store across town, you're probably not going to shop there if you live on the other side of the city. So that's a way that you can really look at it intuitively and think of, if you're a customer shopping at one store and the prices at that store went up after a merger, where could you go to get those alternative products? And that's really the essence of the geographic market inquiry.
So it seems like a lot of retail mergers turn on local markets. And is this why we see a lot of state AG involvement, the local aspect of these deals?
I think that's part of it. Yeah. I think that, these are businesses that most of us interact with on a daily or weekly basis. And especially in an era where, inflation is often in the news, that means retail mergers are in the news. These are businesses people are familiar with. They sell goods that we all need for our everyday lives. And they're often thought of as Main Street issues. So, historically, they've been sort of bipartisan for the antitrust agencies. And as Laura said, it's because they have a direct consumer impact. A loss of competition that increases prices at the point of sale hits consumers' pockets immediately. And so to your question about state AGs, I think that's exactly right. The impact on local communities is direct and tangible. The sign comes down, it's replaced by a new brand. There may be different prices, different goods and services. And that catches the attention of state enforcers who really want to be responsive to their citizens' needs and concerns. So, in a situation, one retailer might have a disproportionate presence in one state or one area, and the Attorney General wants to make sure that there's sufficient attention on that. So state AGs frequently, cooperate with the Federal Trade Commission and assist in the merger review process. And then sometimes they join actions to block a retail deal, or even they file their own lawsuits if a deal is particularly important within their state. So I think this is an area where state AGs feel that they have a real opportunity to do right by their own citizens.
Local markets is certainly a big aspect in retail deals, but the word, just going one step back, the word retail actually encompasses a wide range of business. So we were trying to tell people it's not just grocery stores, right? Retailers can be differentiated in many ways, such as location, types, and quality of items being sold and level of service offered to consumers. This plays into the favorite exercise of us among antitrust lawyers, which is market definition. Can you tell us a little bit more about the implications of having differentiated retailers, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is really fact specific, and it's going to be different for every deal. If the parties to a merger are themselves differentiated, if they have a little bit of a different focus or a different customer experience in the store, I think the initial question is, how closely are they competing? And if the price at one of those stores, were to go up, would customers turn to the other? Are they really competitors in the same relevant market? If they are, then you have that same question to identify other competitors. So when you're looking at any particular geographic area, like Emily was just talking about, what stores that are convenient to the customer that they would be willing to travel to are actual, viable alternatives that they could turn to in the event of a price increase. So there's the exercise of, what is the area of effective competition? And then the exercise of who else competes? Who are the effective competitors that are constraining the merging parties? And again, this can be really different depending on the type of retailer, as you were alluding to. For certain types of goods that maybe customers don't purchase as frequently, they might not mind traveling a bit farther. For something that's a really regular purchase in their lives, that area might be on the smaller side relatively. So it's a really fact-intensive exercise, across mergers.
Laura, as you mentioned, an important consideration is competition and who these stores are competing with. And we've certainly seen a rise of e-commerce over the years, as you alluded to earlier. And for example, I frequently turn to online options for much of my shopping these days. So how does e-commerce factor into the antitrust analysis for retail deals?
Yeah, I think it's sort of similar to the differentiated storefront type analysis. For that particular merger, is e-commerce a constraint or not? And that really depends on how consumers are buying products, whether it's a product that they, frequently would turn to an online retailer for, whether they're comfortable doing that, or whether it's something that maybe they can't purchase online or wouldn't want to. So it really comes down to, does e-commerce constrain the merging parties? A fact-intensive exercise, you can look at whether the parties are looking at e-commerce sites as competitors. You can look at the behavior of consumers. How often are they buying those types of products from online retailers or online-only retailers? And try to get a feel for how important is it to have a storefront, and how important is it to have a storefront, in the same geographic area as the consumers.
Turning to you, Emily, we just talked about how the analysis of retail mergers is often local, right? And with the state agency involvement and whatnot. So I think a sticky point often in this process is the discussion of divestitures, right? And it's actually common because of the different competitive conditions by local market. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how divestiture is usually analyzed, or proposals of divestiture is analyzed in retail mergers?
Sure. So, of course, divestitures, aka structural remedies, they're certainly not specific to retail mergers. They can happen in mergers of all stripes. But, as you and I think Laura said, they're often on the table in this type of deal because of the fact that each of these local markets, be they big, be they small, one may have a serious competitive concern. There may be a really dominant share and not a lot of other competition. And then in another local market, there might be just a ton of competition. And you're not going to block that deal because, there's one market where there's an issue. So instead, merging parties will often propose a package of, storefronts, related assets, and they'll say, we're going to sell these off and we're going to try to fix the problem. But it's not just a matter of sort of selling off a store or two or 10 and sort of slicing off the problematic overlaps. There are some hallmarks and some features that the agencies are routinely looking for when they're evaluating whether a divestiture proposal is going to be feasible and successful. And really, the rigorous nature of the vetting process is intended to make sure that the divestiture buyer or buyers are in a position to immediately step in and replace the competition that's being lost as a result of the merger. And so some factors that are commonly evaluated in looking at a divestiture are whether the divested business is a standalone business, whether it has everything that it needs so that the buyer can begin to operate it immediately. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% turnkey, but a package of assets that's never operated together before might be a little less likely to succeed in the marketplace than a business that previously had operated on its own and now is going to operate on its own again. I think there's also an importance placed on the competitiveness of the buyer. Do they have experience and a track record in this industry? Are they well capitalized? Are they getting the right people and the right resources from the merging parties to ensure that they can have the business continue on, just as strong as it used to be? There's also an important consideration in terms of avoiding what's referred to as ongoing entanglements with the sellers. Obviously there is often some level of transition services that are not only necessary, but also good and positive and appropriate. The divestiture buyer has to be able to step in and run the business and, get what they need and the support to get off the ground. But if you start to have a situation where it looks like many years on, the divestiture buyer is still going to be reliant on the merging parties for important factors of their business, that's something that can create a concern that they're not sufficiently independent competitors that are really going to go head to head. And then finally, I think the agencies just look at sort of certainty and speed of implementation. They're looking for a divestiture proposal and a plan that is specific, has concrete steps, milestones, where they can really be confident that with this plan in place, if all goes according to plan, that buyer is going to be operating and competing with the merged firm, on day one. And so, the divestiture process often sort of takes a long time and it's complicated, but the reason for that is because it's really intended to ensure that the buyer is stepping into the shoes of the merging parties and that no competition is lost.
We covered a lot of ground today discussing retail mergers, the key considerations that the government looks at, and state enforcement. Laura, do you have any parting words of wisdom?
Just one thing I'll add in this area. In retail mergers, as compared with other mergers, there often is actually really good data available. And that means that it can be really helpful to bring on an economist team early in the process to be able to look at that data and see, do we think there could be an issue in any geographic area? Help with that, both the geographic market exercise we talked about, the product market exercise. It really is an area where you can leverage data early on in the process for your analysis and eventually for, your advocacy.
Same thing to you, Emily. Do you have any parting words? Anything that we should watch out for in this space?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Laura that it's really important to get a view on the data as soon as you can. I think that's magnified by the fact that what the data tell you about these different local markets can actually be really different. And I think that, for practitioners, it's really important to be able to go into the agencies with an understanding of sort of what data you have, what stories it can tell, and always with an eye on what is it telling you about consumer demand, about consumer behavior. And I think there's also, we've seen kind of more creative uses of data, perhaps consumer surveys where people talk about what they consider to be good substitutes for each other. So my feeling is that, the more that these analyses are done and the more retail mergers, we'll see more creative uses of these data to make points and make advocacy, and then from the agencies as well to make their points. So, data is kind of king, and that's never less the case than with retail mergers.
Right. Thank you both, Emily and Laura. Since we have you, we usually at OCA, we seize the moment. We try to give our listeners and our viewers an opportunity to know you better personally. So Emily and Laura, I guess maybe start with Laura. Can you share with us a little bit about yourself that people would not know if they had only worked with you professionally?
Sure. I have 2 kids, so when I'm not working, that is how I spend most of my time. They're They're 5 and 2, so in the busy years. But that's probably
How is the troublesome two treating you? Hopefully not too much out of your hands.
knock on wood. Troublesome 2 is not so troublesome, but I know the three-nager phase is right around the corner, so we'll see.
Sounds great. Emily?
I'm glad Laura got to go first. No, I also have got 2 little ones. I've got a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they're lots of fun and a handful. And like his fun fact about myself is that before I went to law school, I worked as an archaeologist in Greece. So maybe that's where I got my penchant for like digging into things and kind of uncovering the layers. But that's my sort of weird icebreaker fact at parties. But yeah, it was great to be on this podcast with you guys. Just really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
I bet retail stores already existed back then.
Of course, retail stores have always existed. I think the markets are probably a little smaller if you only had horses or whatever.
Right. Now we're going to turn to a little bit of silly segment called Our Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
The rule of the game is really simple. Amanda is going to draw a question from a virtual Curious Hat. One could be different questions for you, Emily and Laura. Amanda, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, Emily, your random question is, when you were a young child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I had a lot of pets growing up. I had a little pet sitting business. And
Laura, what is your most frequently used smartphone app, not including email or other work-related app?
Oh gosh. I use the New York Times puzzle app a lot. So I'll do their daily puzzles. I like Wordle and Strands and some of the other ones.
Well, sounds great. That could be one more segment we should add to the program. Maybe we should play some Wordle with our guests. Thank you everyone for watching. As you've noticed that we're turning to video, we hope to see you more in this format. And thank you, Emily and Laura, for joining us. And thank you, Amanda, for hosting a great show. And until next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.